a session with John Shook and Jamie Bonini about the 30 years of Toyota bringing TPS to North America. So, John, nice to have you back, and Jamie Bonini there.
Hello, Chris. Thank you for getting us started and for doing this now for, I don't know, almost 12 hours, I guess we're into this. And hello, Jamie. Thank you for joining.
Happy to be here.
I believe, Jamie, you are in at Toyota's North American headquarters today. Is that correct?
That's right. Right. I'm here in Dallas, Texas.
Dallas, Texas, and doing all the wonderful things that are happening every day at Toyota, I'm sure. Thanks again for joining us. I know you're busy. We're going to talk today about kind of our favorite topic. It has many sides to it. And one is TPS and lean thinking in practice. The other is TSSC specifically. And this is 2022. And this is the year of the 30th anniversary of TSSC. You are the president of TSSC. And at a kind of an important time, I think, for that organization. And I believe, as many others do, and I think you do as well, that TSSC is provided an important function in many ways. Why don't you share, if you could, what TSSC is, and then we can kind of go have a conversation then about what has happened there over 30 years and what you've learned, and where things may go from here. What is TSSC?
Yeah, sure. Happy to do that. And I very much enjoyed hearing Lisa's remarks. That was really inspiring. So Lisa, if you're listening, thank you for that. So basically, TSSC stands for the Toyota Production System Support Center. And it is a nonprofit subsidiary of Toyota that was formed, as you mentioned, John, 30 years ago. And you were involved in the very beginning. And originally it was formed to share the Toyota production system outside Toyota with companies and originally suppliers in some cases that wanted to learn and apply the Toyota production system. And we've evolved since then, but our mission is to share TPS outside Toyota and all kinds of automotive and non-automotive and nonprofit settings to make a contribution to society. So we do this as a way of contributing through sharing TPS and also to help strengthen manufacturing in North America. So we live in the world of translating the Toyota production system or lean enterprise that Toyota does internally to non-automotive settings and nonprofit settings is what we do, and mostly on-site working on-site with organizations in various different ways.
Great. And yes, I was there in the beginning, 30 years ago. At that time, you're the president of TSSC. It's a nonprofit subsidiary. At that time, it was an internal group. There was a general manager, not a president, and I was the deputy general manager. And it's in some ways we couldn't have. It would have been very hard to imagine 30 years in the future, and what could have unfolded over that time. But I think at this point, TSSC has had something close to 500 projects with companies. As you mentioned, mainly it's hands-on learning. You go and you work with companies, and can you describe a little bit about how you go about doing that important work with companies, of how to share what it is to be a lean enterprise or to adopt the Toyota production system? As you mentioned, you're in the business of translating Toyota's way of thinking and working into other settings. So how do you go about that nowadays?
Sure. And maybe, John, I should start off is how we define TPS.
Yes.
When we share it externally, and that'll lead into kind of how we go about this. So when we share TPS, we share it as the following definition. The Toyota production system is an organizational culture of highly engaged people that are solving problems or innovating to drive performance. So a culture of engagement, solving problems and driving performance. And that culture is created and sustained by a three-part system that we describe with a triangle. And there are three aspects to that it's an equilateral triangle. There are three aspects of that are very important. It starts off with a philosophy that underlies some technical tools, principally around just-in-time and Jidoka. And then there is a managerial role, which is to engage and develop people. So it's a three-part system of philosophy, technical, and managerial role that is TPS, this culture of highly engaged people driving performance. So that's the definition. So when we go outside Toyota in different environments, we may talk about some examples. What we're looking at is we typically find a business need, a particular situation where an organization needs to make improvement in their performance, typically in the area of quality or lead time or speed or productivity or output. There's a business need, an imperative at hand. And we'll work in a small area. Maybe 30 people will work there. In that small area, it could be a unit in a hospital, it could be a section of a manufacturing line, it could be a section of a vaccination site. But in that area with those 30 people, we will try to build this culture of highly engaged people solving problems in a way that drives performance in response to that business need. And then we reflect on how well that culture works in that organization, if it fits their environment and their situation. And then we may go on to work in another area or another area. So we start off with this model area and then scale it appropriately where it makes sense.
Okay. And when you go into the model area, so sometimes I think even in the early days, and you still do, we describe it as an inch wide and a mile deep. When you try to do that today, and again, if there have been close to 500 or so projects. So when I was there, I remember when there were maybe 20 or so projects. I remember the very, very earliest ones. And what was remarkable to us at that time was that it worked. And in the very beginning, we weren't sure. I mean, this is 1992, and there's this desire you mentioned to repay the United States, North America, to make a contribution. And what's the most powerful contribution Toyota could make, other than providing, product, great products at a reasonable price? Well, there's this thing called TPS that had been developed over about a half a century. So, but what was that going to look like? How would that happen? There, on the one hand, there was confidence, I think, but also it wasn't quite sure. It was a little uncertain how it would turn out. But the very, very first projects were just highly successful, and so that brought a lot of excitement. But I think you've learned a lot in the last 30 years since those early days. As you think about the model line, and you mentioned you find a small area where there's a specific business problem that needs to be solved, and then you roll up your sleeves and work alongside. What kind of, I don't know, what kind of challenges that nowadays do you see that you think you've learned to handle better than maybe we did in the earlier days? You mentioned that there's an equilateral triangle. So does one of those present a greater challenge than the others, or how does that work out now as you work through all these situations with companies every day?
Well, I wasn't there in the early days. Unfortunately, John, I know you were, but some of the folks we have in TSSC now were. What I can share with you in my 11 years here would have been some of the major learnings, how we've evolved, and TSSC has gotten quite a bit larger over that period of time. I think there are three significant learnings. The first one is that TPS is an equilateral triangle. And based on the situation, we need to fortify and build all three sides of those triangles. The philosophy needs to take root. That underlies the technical tools. We'll be applying technical elements and methods, principally around just-in-time and Jidoka and standardized work and the like. And the managerial role, which is about an organizational structure and leaders that are developing people to solve problems. I think the first thing is the need to constantly remind ourselves that we need to appropriately focus and fortify all three sides of the triangle. And of course, of those three sides, the technical elements are the most tangible that you can see. The philosophy and the managerial role are less tangible. We really have to, we've learned to really focus on all three sides of that triangle. And I will tell you that when I joined TSSC, the president was Akinori Saito, who you know, and that was the most strong and vivid lesson he tried to impart on me. He said, Jamie, never forget that TPS is a three-sided triangle and all three need to be work in equilibrium. And the amount of focus we need to do on one side or the other with an organization may vary situationally, but all three ultimately need to be working. I think that's been a major emphasis. And then another kind of deeper level than that is how do you know it's working? Well, you know it's working when you have highly engaged people that are solving problems in a way that designs importance. Usually you can feel that in an environment, but that's really important that system's got to create that. There are a couple other learnings. You want me to share that, John, or you want me to go into those?
Sure. And I happen to be I don't know if I can show this on.
Oh, there's the triangle.
But this is a TPS overview from a TS. So many may not know that occasionally TSSC and LEI do some joint activities. And this is a booklet from that. And I think you can see there the triangle.
Yeah.
With the three parts. And people in the middle, as I say, people development or engaged people in the middle. And any further thoughts? You know, when you think about translating this, a lot of times when I'm out and about, you know, Lisa Yerian, Dr. Yerian, who just spoke, and you referenced, for example, visiting her in Cleveland Clinic or wherever it may be, we often think about it, there's kind of more of a standard terminology around social and technical systems. And so that balance between the two of being so difficult and critical, and people tend to think it's one more than the other, and maybe you never get them totally in balance, but that effort to get them in balance is critical, and it needs to be on a foundation of purpose. Lisa was using the word purpose a lot. In other words, what's your philosophy that really hold this together? So yes, please. Any other additional thoughts? Didn't mean to interrupt you.
So I think the first one is the focus on an equilateral triangle, that way all three sides need to work cohesively and reinforcedly, and that it's an equilateral triangle. So that's the first. The second thing I would say that we have learned is, of the three sides of the triangle, what is typically most challenging is to build a managerial role. I've been at this for 11 years, and when I first got started, I did not anticipate that would be the most challenging, but that typically is because, and I think Lisa alluded to quite a bit in the overtones of her talk, the managerial role is about an organizational structure, number one, there's some principles behind how to design that structure, but also very much a servant leadership model of coaching and developing people in a way that they are engaged. And in many cases, that is the most challenging to build. I think that's the second lesson. And then the third, and well, John, we could talk about the approach we use to building this culture, a little more about model lines and what we've learned about that and about scaling. But those are the two initial ones.
Okay. And when it comes to the, I mean, it certainly makes sense, I think, to everyone who's with us today too, that the management side and the management, the behaviors, the mindset, and clarifying the role has to be just so critical to make this work. I do think the technical part still remains heavily important as well. That's what makes the change. That's what makes the performance improvement. And that's what people are going to use every day to do their work, is the kind of tools and techniques that we give them. What about as one of the things in the early days that we did, at least when I was there, we didn't even get that far, which was thinking a lot about Yokoten inside companies, of how to get it to spread and to get it to spill over into different parts of the company. And the managerial role has to be very important for that, right? I imagine. Again, we didn't get very far with that at that time. I think you've learned a lot of lessons in that regard. And you mentioned as we were talking the other day, how a focus has to be on developing this passion or to have a real zeal for TPS. And without that spillover to the rest of the organization is probably not going to happen.
Yeah, that's been another big learning, John, is what we have found is the purpose of the model line, the sort of first area of 30 or so people, is to build that triangle with highly engaged people that drives performance that is needed at that time. And then after we have that working with an organization, they may decide to spread it to model line number 2, model line number 3, and kind of spread this culture. And what we have found is that the key to the spreading is that in the initial model line we build, there are a couple leaders that become, I like to use the word zealots.
Mm-hmm.
They become extremely passionate about lean or TPS and how it can help their organization, help their people. And if we can develop a zealot through the first model line, then the going to model line number 2 and 3 is vastly enabled, because that zealot will be able to figure out, having learned TPS by doing TPS, hey, this is where we should go next to this area. They can guide that decision, which of course TSSC can't define. We're not in the organization. And they can say, when we go to this area, these are the people that we need to have involved in this next area that will make this successful. Now that this person has had a good understanding of the managerial role. Where we've had these zealots to guide the spreading, it's proved vastly more effective. In fact, we've kind of adjusted our approach. Sometimes I say, real purpose of the model line is to build a zealot or 2 or 3.
Cool.
Because if we do that, then we can scale, which have the potential for broader organizational impact.
Right. If you build a zealot, then hopefully each zealot can build 2 more zealots.
Yeah.
And then that can spread through the
Right.
organization. Do you remember back when you learned to become a zealot about TPS? Was it after you joined TSSC or before you joined TSSC? Because you were at Toyota before you came to TSSC.
That's correct. I've been at Toyota for going on 21 years, but I started out in TSSC. I was there for a number of years, and then I worked in our plant in Kentucky, and then I worked with suppliers, and then I always wanted to come back to the TPS groups and was fortunate to be able to do that.
Speaking of zealots, but also just having success in making this take hold, here's another thing I can kind of hold up here, which is a book called Getting Home. And it's the story, it's by Liz McCartney and Zach Rosenberg. And it's the story of one of my favorite TSSC projects, which I had a chance to visit. It was after it had been going for a couple of years, but it's an amazing story. And it's just continued to grow, as I understand it. And I doubt that could happen unless Zach and the team had become zealots along the way. You want to share a little bit about that story?
Yeah, exactly. So Zach and Liz are examples of zealots. That's a really great case study. We got started with them after Hurricane Katrina, and they were rebuilding homes. It's described in the book with volunteer-based labor in New Orleans. It's a project management type of process, but the physical process is rebuilding homes, meaning you're installing, first homes are gutted, they're cleaned, then they work on plumbing and electrical, and then you have volunteers that will put up sheetrock and that will paint and install cabinets and finishing. It's a combination of contract labor and volunteers working in the community. That process involves project planning to scope out what's going to happen with the house. And then there are all kinds of processes involved: hiring or recruiting volunteers, training them, getting up to speed, and getting better and better at rebuilding homes, even though the homes are different. We work with them for a number of years. And Zach and Liz, who have huge passion for their work helping the community, got to the point that they could see how building this culture of highly engaged people, even when they're different people all the time, could really help them build more homes more effectively. And it's become really passionate on that topic. And spread it throughout all their SBP operations, and also shares what they do outside SBP. So that's just a terrific example of what we're talking about.
Well, it is, and maybe that's a good point to kind of transition the conversation a little bit, because as TSSC became a nonprofit, and it's fulfilling this mission that Toyota assigned it of sharing TPS more broadly. Here we are in 2022, and there have been successful examples of zealots being created, popping up, different companies, different organizations, United States and around the world. But if you think back in some ways to this book, Machine That Changed the World, which is kind of that introduced, the term lean, and it was the first time really to kind of explain to the outside world what Toyota was trying to do with TPS and more than and in terms of how Toyota worked. A lot has happened in the 30 years since that book came out, and the 30 years of TSSC, and we have wonderful examples like St. Bernard's project of building homes for people, using volunteer labor to build homes for people who don't have a home. So the power of this to benefit society is still so evident, but maybe not fully tapped into. You and I have had conversations about how we wish, and TSSC has done a lot. In fact, when I was there, one of the things we did, we started doing projects. We also reached out to develop relationships with universities, began writing, case examples of studies of what we were doing, going to conferences to speak, to doing things like you're doing today, to try to help kind of get the word out there. But there's still much to be done in terms of sharing these ideas, getting more spillover so more people can benefit from them. This isn't a matter of trying to, Toyota's not benefiting directly by sharing this. This is something that we want to see the world benefit from. And the St. Bernard's project is a great example, but there are others. How do you feel in representing Toyota about the state of understanding what TPS or lean thinking and practice is, and where it could be, or where it should be, sitting here in the almost a quarter of the way into the 21st century?
Where it could be or where it should be, did you say, John?
Yeah, where it could be or should be. And I know you have a passion around the education component of this, for one.
Well, a couple of thoughts. So in my role, each year we'll support about 50 different organizations in one form or another. So for most of what I spend our time doing, my time and our time doing, is at organizations, helping them build this culture of highly engaged people. And that is challenging, building that triangle. The process we've described sounds fairly simple, but it takes some collaboration and effort to make that work. So that's what I'm saying. I think more broadly, and you and I have talked about this, there's kind of a good news and a bad news story here. When I first joined TSSC, and you and I first connected about a decade ago, when I started going to various lean conferences with LEI and all kinds of other different organizations, one of my first combinations is I was just shocked. I was completely shocked about what I saw in the outside world. And I was shocked by several things. One is I felt that TPS wasn't properly understood. When people talk about TPS or lean, they were typically emphasizing not what you and I are thinking about, and Lisa was talking about. They're thinking about a collection of technical tools, just one side of the triangle. And so I think there's been in spite of a lot of effort to try to describe TPS as a holistic system of a socio-technical, there still has been, in many areas, companies, organizations, leaders, a an overemphasis on the technical and not enough emphasis on the social side. So I think that's one of the challenges we in the lean community have to make things more understandable, which is one of the reasons why, John, we've produced a lot of videos that you've helped, and we've tried to make it more understandable in a simple format to make that the non-technical stuff be more accessible. So that's one. And then the second point, I think there are sectors where if you go into sort of automotive and automotive suppliers, which is more like Toyota, there are more of these practices in place than there were 30 years ago. The diffusion has been more rigorous because the physical process is more alike. But when you go to other areas, Lisa was talking about healthcare, or we go into construction, or we go into software development, the folks that lead and work in those sectors, they're just not familiar with this. This is very different. So it's not as well known, and to translate into those areas is going to continue to take more examples, to have more models, to have more showcases. So I think those are some of the challenges we face.
Well, I guess so, and I think the challenge won't really go away. It's hard to have a scorecard for it. I think sometimes out in the lean world, Jamie, there's been a tendency to want to look for the next Toyota in whatever industry. And it depends what you mean by that, but there's only one Toyota. Toyota had its own problems to solve starting a long time ago. And as you explained, and Toyota people have explained always, that TPS was built over many years of engaged people solving one problem at a time, innovating. And at the end, you put it together, and this is what it is. It fits their situation. And one of the problems is, I think, when people try to copy and they see some of the solutions, and they don't fit for a couple of reasons. One, it's a different industry. The work is different. But even when it's exactly the same work, if GM just tried to copy what it learned, what it saw at NUMMI, and put it in place, it's going to have a very limited impact. It's not going to be the same.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to get the culture that you talked
Mm-hmm.
about when you define it as a culture. So how then to simply make it more available to more people, because people can benefit from it. Again, the St. Bernard Project example, you think about Lisa's work at Cleveland Clinic. This makes the world better. It's not just a matter of developing a certain product that I can then sell at a cheaper price or something like that. This is the way supply chains that are so broken in the world can be made more robust. It's the way that people can be more engaged in their work, so that people can have a more fulfilling life. When we spend 8 hours of our day, sometimes more, in a place of work, let's be engaged instead. So one of the things you and I have talked about, to briefly introduce here, is embarking on an activity to get input from a broad spectrum of individuals of how we can position TPS lean for the 21st century, and with the hopes that more would get involved in learning it in a deeper way, not just a narrow, superficial way. Do you agree with those thoughts as well?
No, absolutely. And I'm very eager to be working with you, John, and LEI and others to see, are there some tangible actions we can take in the lean community to, beyond what all the hard work that's happened over 30 years that has done a lot. Lean is well understood around the world. You've got the Lean Global Network. There are a lot of people that are passionate and interested that didn't exist 30 years ago. So there's been a lot of progress. And many organizations have some form of lean or OpEx departments or activities, but there's still a lot more that can be done. So I'm looking forward to working with you to figure out what are some new breakthrough activities we might embark on to make this more accessible, is the word I'll use, or understandable or actionable. So I'm very excited to see what we can come up and together. We've got people that care a lot about that, and I think we'll come up with some keen ideas, and maybe some of the people that are with us today will be able to give us some ideas about that too.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Jamie. And with you and Toyota's help and all the people that are joining today, I think we can make that progress. And we'll keep at it. So thanks, Jamie. And Christopher, is that you there?
Yeah, I'm here, John. So our time here is up for this activity here. And so thank you, John. Thank you, Jamie.